Since March, about 50 million people have filed for unemployment insurance. In numbers we've never seen before, about half these people were denied for their unemployment insurance claims. Millions of people are still waiting to be approved. Some people were denied the base unemployment insurance and only got the $600 addition that the federal government was adding. So the way that our government chose to help people or provide assistance through this crisis was through the unemployment insurance program. And it's been an unmitigated disaster in any number of ways. But as many of you know, even the shitty unemployment program that was keeping people from completely falling apart financially, that expired over a week ago. So about the 20 million people who were approved for unemployment insurance millions of them will not get another unemployment check for at least weeks, maybe even months, since negotiations in DC between House leadership, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and that corporate Democrats in the House, and Steve Mnuchin and Meadows from the White House. These negotiations have gone nowhere. There is no deal, and the Senate went home on vacation. So right now the situation is dire. We've talked about on this show many times how 30 million people are at risk of eviction by October. About a third of people in this country could not make their July housing payments, whether it's rent or mortgage. So people were hanging on by a thread, and our government completely pulled the rug out from underneath them when they allowed the temporarily expanded unemployment to expire with absolutely no plan to provide assistance to the people in this country who desperately need it. Well, over the weekend, Donald Trump, apparently he's feeling the pressure, and he's realizing, this shit is about to go real bad real fast if we don't get money to people as soon as possible. So coming to this realization, Donald Trump signed an executive order, and honestly, the executive order is shit. It doesn't go anywhere near as far as we need to go to provide assistance to people in this country who need it. And I'll get into the details of the specifics of these executive orders that he signed. But let's just be clear that none of these are great. None of these are nothing to write home about, and he isn't doing nearly enough. But I think there's a more nuanced conversation to be had about the legality and effectiveness of Trump trying to bypass Congress to provide some kind of assistance, even if it's just temporary assistance throughout these negotiations for a broader economic relief package. So on the executive order on evictions, so the order that Trump signed, fairly weak sauce. There is no real enforcement to it. There is no teeth to it. It's just really a suggestion to housing and urban development to consider not evicting the people who live in federally subsidized housing and can't afford to make their rent payments. So it's not even an official order to pause all evictions at federally subsidized properties like how he signed at the beginning of this crisis. Now this is just a suggestion. Hey, maybe you do it, maybe you don't. So that's fairly weak sauce. Another thing that I think is just a giant giveaway to corporations is this payroll tax holiday. So everybody, when they get their paycheck, there's money taken out that goes to Social Security and it goes to Medicare. And your employer is supposed to at least match those funds, and it goes into a saving account that you can draw on when you're older and you're eligible for Medicare and Social Security benefits. The right wing has been hell-bent on trying to cut this because it's essentially a tax cut for businesses. So Trump or the right wingers in his administration just threw this in there. Doesn't really help the people who are desperate right now, the 50 million people who are unemployed. This literally does nothing for them since they have no payroll taxes being deducted, since they have no income. So this really does absolutely nothing for them. And there's huge questions raised about the legality of this and how this is actually going to work, because the way that he worded it, the way that it's structured, it's not that payroll tax is taken out by law. It was a law passed by Congress, signed by the president. So it is binding. So what Trump's doing is just telling the IRS not to collect it, since he does have authority over the IRS and the day-to-day functions of the IRS, since he's the president, head of the executive branch. So he's just telling them not to collect it. But people will technically still owe that money. So eventually, at some point down the line, if they go weeks or months without paying this payroll tax, they may eventually have to pay it back out of their own pocket. So that executive order was completely sloppy and may turn around and even hurt the working class even more. One of the best parts of this executive order, and probably the most binding part, since this largely goes to the functions of the executive branch, he's going to continue to the suspension of all student loan payments, and he's going to have 0% interest on all federal student loans to the end of the year, which is decent. I think it'd be more appropriate to cancel all student loan debt. And now to one of the most controversial parts of these executive orders was his actions on unemployment insurance. So he plans on taking $44 billion left over from the CARES Act and from funds that FEMA hasn't used. And he wants to continue to give the federal unemployment checks for up to another 5 weeks with that money. And here's the kicker: he plans on cutting so it was as people were getting $600 a week from the federal government in addition to whatever they were getting from unemployment, or maybe they weren't getting anything from unemployment from their state, but at least they were getting the $600 a week from the federal government. Well, now Trump's going to cut that to $300. Well, I don't even know if you could call it a cut, because technically nobody's getting anything because the unemployment insurance expired. So he's proposing a $300 cut from what it was, and that will be devastating to millions of people who are already living on the brink since this economic crisis started. So a lot of what these executive orders did was stir up some controversy, especially the one about the unemployment insurance, about whether or not he has the legal authority to do this as president. And I think it's an interesting conversation. If there was leftover money from the CARES Act and from FEMA, there is an argument to be made as the head of the executive branch. He has some sort of discretion on how to handle those funds, especially to deal with a emergency situation, a national emergency. And I would say 50 million people unemployed is a national emergency. 30 million people risking eviction in weeks is a national emergency. And then you factor in that the negotiations with Congress aren't going anywhere. Now, you can say that Trump and the Republicans are largely responsible for that because they're just being ridiculous in their demands and arbitrary lines that they're setting. We're not spending more than $1 trillion, and just they're doing a bunch of nonsense to derail negotiations. But the Democrats aren't much better at this negotiation either. And like I said, we're nowhere. We're still going nowhere. And these benefits have expired, and it's coming up on the time when they would get their next check, and they're not going to get it. Millions of people in this country are not going to get it. So Trump doing this executive order, I mean, it's something. It's something. At least he's doing something. And the Democrats are threatening to take him to court over it and block him from doing this. And to me, that's kind of a dicey situation because, yes, like I said, there is a legal argument to be made that, hey, Congress said this money's supposed to go to this, so the president can't just take it and use it for whatever he wants to do it. There's a legal argument to be made there. But at the same time, you're having this whole legal debate about about who is going to provide at least some kind of assistance to the people emergency assistance to people who need it desperately. Congress, like I said, they can't decide on how to do that. And then the president takes action on his own, and then the Democrats in Congress are going to say, oh, no, you can't do that. You have to wait for us to come to some end of negotiations, which at some indefinite time, unknown time. And all the people who are desperately waiting for some sort of help from the federal government, they're just going to have to wait till we figure this out and get our shit together. They're just going to have to wait until we feel like doing something, until Congress has taken enough recesses and vacations and we actually pass something into law. I mean, you're making a scholarly argument when people are literally facing a situation where they may not be able to put food on their table next week. They may not be able to pay for the utilities next week. So it is kind of a lose-lose situation for the Democrats. Either you let Trump kind of run roughshod over constitutional boundaries, or you just let people sit and starve while you do these negotiations that aren't getting anywhere. So I think that part of the conversation is very nuanced, and anybody who's pretending like it's not, I mean, they're doing a disservice to this issue. I'm curious to hear what my audience thinks about this. I'm not going to pretend like I have a 100% certain position on this. I don't think this is anywhere nearly enough. I don't think people should settle for this. I think it's embarrassing that our federal government, as shitty as they handle this economic crisis, their response right now is to cut the benefits that they're giving to people. I think that's immoral. I think that's gross, and and I think it's just disgusting. But at the same time, we are where we are, and at this point, it's going to be weeks until people get any kind of benefits from the government. So, is it really the worst thing in the world to just let Trump do this executive order and get these measly payments out to people? I don't think so. But like I said, I'm interested in your opinion on this.